Just very briefly, Lawrence is going to introduce Alan Dershowitz. But as I said before, Lawrence Pinsky is a Winnipegger. He's in the Sea of Galilee today, and he's one of the founders of Blue and White, the grassroots organization that grew up after October 7th. He's a King's Council lawyer in Manitoba, former human rights adjudicator, and he's been instrumental. He brought Nitsana to us, and now he's bringing Alan to us. So without any further ado, I'll turn it over to Lawrence.
Thanks so much, Don, and Shabbat Shalom to everyone in Winnipeg, where I imagine it's still freezing cold. Alan is intelligently in Florida, and I, as Don said, am near the Sea of Galilee at a kibbutz. I'm so grateful and honored to be able to introduce Professor Dershowitz to you all, although really he's somebody who doesn't need much of an introduction. That, of course, never stopped me or anyone else from actually taking the time to introduce. So that is what I'm about to do. I'll just tell you that I met Alan at a conference in New York from Shurat Hadin some years ago, and Alan was on stage in a fireside chat type of environment, and he talked about some of the things that we're going to touch on today, among many other things. But one of the things he said was that he's such a strong advocate and believer in really pro bono advocacy, and that's in many ways what this is, that he would go to any university or anything and appear in some format if he was invited. And I ran up to him afterwards and said, I believe that's offer, and now you have acceptance. Come to Winnipeg. The caveat was no one comes to Winnipeg in the dead of winter, but he did agree to do this remotely. So thank you for doing that. Professor Dershowitz is one of the United States, and I would say one of the West's most renowned, outspoken, and high-profile criminal defense attorneys and constitutional law experts. He has had national fame for defending high-profile clients like O.J. Simpson, Klaus von Bülow, Mr. Epstein, and Donald Trump, the President of the United States. Before retiring, Professor Dershowitz spent 50 years on the faculty of Harvard Law School, where at 28 years old, a few years ago, he was the youngest full professor in the school's history. Professor Dershowitz is a prolific author, over 30 books, including The Case for Israel and Chutzpah, Taking the Stand, among others. Throughout his career, Professor Dershowitz has been a staunch defender of civil liberties, often taking interesting constitutional cases, testing boundaries, and representing people pro bono in fighting for the cause of justice. And the role people need to understand, and some people don't, people need to understand the importance of the role of the criminal defense attorney in ensuring that the system is, to the degree possible, fair and just and isn't overly oppressive. So the role that Professor Dershowitz has played in doing that for all these folks and many others is critical in keeping the democracy that we know, the concept of innocent until proven guilty, live and full of life. Beyond the courtroom, Professor Dershowitz is a prominent public intellectual, media commentator, specializing in those various areas we talked about, in criminal law, in civil liberties, and in the defense of Israel. Professor Dershowitz remains one of the most visible and exceptional and extraordinary legal minds of the modern era. So, Professor Dershowitz, thanks so much for being here safely from Florida.
Thank you so much for having me. I love Canada. My role model for my work over the years has been Irwin Cotler, my dear friend, who was the Minister of Justice and the Attorney General of Canada. I first came to Canada at Irwin's request when Pierre Trudeau was the Prime Minister, and he invoked the War Measures Act in 1970, and I was asked to come up pro bono to consult with the Prime Minister on the civil liberties and human rights issues relating to the War Measures Act. So I've had a very close connection with Canada over the years. Needless to say, I'm extremely disappointed with the current government. Its recognition of a Palestinian state without even demanding that the state recognize Israel or bring about peace and eschew Hamas. I'm not going to say that the loss by Canada to the United States in the gold medals at the Olympics was revenge against Canada's ill-advised statements, but I have to admit that I was very, very happy with the results of those games, and I send my sincerest condolences. I'm a big hockey fan. I used to go to Boston Bruin games all the time. My favorite players were all Canadian, but my American teams were always American. So I'm very happy with that. Just one correction. More than 30 books, yes, but I'm now up to book number 68. I'm writing a book, which I'm almost done with, called Founding Fathers and One Jewish Mother, where I compare the founding of America and the founding of Israel, the Jewish mother being obviously Golda Meir. And that book will be out hopefully on July 4th to celebrate America's 250th anniversary. Canada and America have always worked together to produce and help on human rights. I hope we continue to do so, but I sincerely hope that the Canadian government will see the light and understand that the only way to truce for any kind of peace in the Middle East is mutual agreement between Israel and the Palestinians based on their negotiation, not external influence by nations that cannot really contribute to the peace in the Middle East. So I'm hoping for better relations between the United States, Canada, and Israel, and I'm relatively confident that will happen over time. So thank you for inviting me. I know there was some threat of protesters outside. A lot of people don't like when criminal defense lawyers defend unpopular clients, but that's what I have done all my life and would continue to do so. People praised me when I defended, along with Erwin Kottler, Nelson Mandela in South Africa, when we together defended Anatoly Sharansky, Natan Sharansky in the Soviet Union, and when we continue to defend people who are unpopular in other countries. But that has to extend as well to defending people who are unpopular in our own country. So I'm sure Erwin and I will continue to do that. And I hope that we will have many years together to continue to fight for tzedek, tzedek, tirdof, justice, justice must you seek. And the other part of the biblical command, right next to justice, justice shall you seek, is lo takir ponim, do not recognize faces, do not distinguish among people who you defend. You must defend the merits of every case, regardless of the face or the person who's behind the case. So I look forward to some good questions and some useful answers, and let's continue to work together in the interests of tzedek and shalom.
Thanks, Alan. Really appreciate it. And your point is spot on. You should know we live in a province where our premier fired an MLA ostensibly because one of his law partners defended someone in a criminal case. And that betrays a fundamental lack of understanding of the role of lawyers and criminal defense lawyers in a democracy. But let's move on. You mentioned your book of the founding fathers and one founding mother, and it is a nice segue to where I wanted to begin, which is the creation of the state and the legal basis for it. I think it's important that people understand in a nutshell, and it really goes back before, of course, the creation of the state to the League of Nations and even arguably beyond that. So can you share with us what you see as the legal basis for the creation of the state and its legitimacy?
Yeah, let's just compare the creation of Israel with the creation, say, of New Zealand. New Zealand, like Canada and like the United States, was colonized, obviously, by strangers, by people who had no connection. The folks from England who came to New Zealand and murdered many of the Maori and then made the treaties with them, which were one-sided treaties. That was pure colonialism, pure imperialism. Israel is completely different. Jews have lived in Israel from the earliest recorded history. There was never a day since the year 4000 BC when a Jew didn't live in Israel. Even when the Jews were expelled by the Romans in 70 AD, Jewish pockets remained in Tzfat and Hebron, in other places. And every Jew, every day, prayed for the return to Zion. I'm old enough to remember the Hatikva song before 1948, Lashuv la'aretz avotenu, and only after 1948 were those words to return to the land of our ancestors changed to Liot Dam Chafshi, to remain a free nation. Yes, Tucker Carlson and the bigots and the anti-Semites and the Nazis have all said, no, current Jews have nothing to do with Israel. They're really the descendants of Turkish this and that, which ignores, completely the Sephardic Jews, which are more than 50% of Israel today, which have had complete close connections that can be documented through so many different, including DNA tests. But even the DNA tests show that the descendants of Levi, the descendants of Kohanim, still have identifiable DNA that probably goes back to the biblical time. So, you don't need legal rights to have a nation that's recognized. But there's no nation in history, I repeat this, no nation in history that has a better birth certificate in terms of legal rights than Israel. Certainly not the United States, where we had to fight a revolution. Canada was part of that whole process of decolonializing from England, Australia, New Zealand. But Israel has always had legal status right from the beginning. When the first Aliyah occurred, and even before the first Aliyah, there were many Jews. When the 1832 census took place, way before modern political Zionism was established, there were more Jews in Jerusalem than Arabs. In fact, Arabs were third. There were Jews, number one, number two, Christians, and number three, Arabs. So Jews have always lived there. And then Zionism, obviously, political Zionism, added to what was religious Zionism. Religious Zionism goes back, obviously, to the origins of Judaism. Of political Zionism begins at about the same time that New Zealand gets settled by Cook and others. So, the claims are very, very strong. And then, of course, legally, you get the Balfour Declaration, you get the various UN, and you get the League of Nations declarations. And ultimately, in 1947, there's a vote of the United Nations that, for the first time, recognizes the two-state solution, which was basically based on the Peel Report from 1937, 1938, that said two nations for two people. Israel immediately accepted the 1947 division. All the Arab countries rejected it. Israel then declared itself a nation state, immediately recognized by the United States, the Soviet Union, many other countries. And the Arabs caused the Nakba. They now use the word Nakba, but it's a self-inflicted wound. Had the Arab states accepted the 48 division, there'd today be a large Palestinian state, much larger than Israel, just counting the Negev that nobody wanted. The two areas that nobody wanted were the Negev and the Gaza Strip. The resolution gave the vast majority of arable land and good land to the Palestinians, but they rejected it. They invaded Israel along with all the Arab states, and then Arab residents left. That is the Nakba. I've never heard of a more self-inflicted wound than what the Palestinians called the Nakba. The word Zionism is an interesting word, and I've stopped using it in part because Zionism was an aspiration. It was a goal. To be a Zionist was to hope for the establishment of a Jewish state. And the Jewish state's a reality. It's one of the strongest states in the world. Militarily, it's ranked among the top 10 in the world. Economically, it's very near the top. Scientifically, technologically, it's at the very, very top. The idea that you have to say, I'm a Zionist, I hope for a Jewish state. No, I'm a Zionist because I'm an anti-Zionist. The word anti-Zionism has become a way of trying to delegitimate Israel, to say that Israel has no right to exist. That should be taken as a given, Israel's right to exist. It's there. It's been there. It's been the most successful post-colonialist state in the history of the world, in the history of colonialism. And so I'm an Israelist. I'm a supporter of Israel, and I don't have to apologize for Israel's right to exist legally, politically, diplomatically. No country in the world with a population as small as Israel's has contributed so much to the world medically, scientifically, technologically, agriculturally. No apologies are due. Israel is there. It will remain there. It's an important part of the world of nations. And anybody who fails to support Israel's existence is a bigot. There's no excuse for it. It's anti-Semitism because it's a double standard. Why are you not challenging the existence of other post-colonial or even colonial states? Why Israel alone? It's only because Israel is the nation state of the Jewish people. So any anti-Zionist, anybody who's anti-Israel should be ashamed of themselves and should not be boasting about what a great humanitarian there are. They're violating the most basic principles of humanity and of decency and of legality. So no apologies. Israel must remain strong. There's a verse in the Psalms of David, which is a verse that I recite all the time because it's so important to me. I'll start with the Hebrew, Hashem ozli amo yitain, Hashem yivarech amo b'shalom. The good Lord will give the Jewish people O's strength, and only then will they have peace. The history of the world's relation to Jews has always been that the only way to survive is through strength, through O's. That was proved during the Shoah, the Holocaust. The Jews had morality in their side, but they did not have strength. That was proved during the Inquisitions, during the pogroms. Today, Jews have O's. They have a state. They have a strong military, and that must be defended and supported by all means. And nobody should condemn Israel for using its military to defend its civilian population. So I'm proud to be a supporter of Israel. I will continue to be a supporter of Israel. I can be critical of some of Israel's policies, just as I'm critical of America's policies and Canada's policies and France's policies and Great Britain's policies. And as a Jew, I have a right to be particularly critical if I disagree with a policy. But I will never use my disagreement with policies to suggest somehow that Israel doesn't have the right, as a democracy, to make its own decisions, its own mistakes, without jeopardizing its right to exist as the democratic nation state of the Jewish people. So thank you for giving me an opportunity to express my basic background and views. And now I'm looking forward to your hard questions.
Thank you for your answer. I wish I could pick up this line. I don't have time to talk about the difference as to whether the term Zionist is still a relevant term. I wish I could pick that up with you. I've had that discussion with a number of people, but I can't. So I'm going to go to something else.
Reasonable people could disagree with it, and it really doesn't matter.
Agreed. I'm not picking it up. I'm not picking that question up.
Israelism, call it whatever you want. Yeah.
Okay. So here's what I am going to pick up, though, and I should add in that aside from the Peel Commission, of course, in the 1920s, when Winston Churchill was the colonial secretary, he proposed an even smaller Jewish state that was accepted by the Yishuv, by the Jewish entity there. And of course, once again, the Arab population itself was bullied by the most vile and Muslim Brotherhood affiliated groups there to reject it, as everything has been rejected, every peace offer, which we'll come to. Let me ask you about this. A two-part question. One is, there's an argument that Israel, in its founding, intentionally ethnically cleansed Arabs, or what are now called Palestinians, they weren't called that then, out of the area. It's kind of funny because I was driving to where I am now on a kibbutz near the Sea of Galilee and went through many, many Arab villages and towns, very highly developed. Lots of, frankly, I was driving along the road with near Mercedes and BMWs and highly developed areas, but yet some Arab communities were removed. So what do we make of that? That some people use that to say that that really somehow Israel is not a legitimate state because they ethnically cleansed Arabs, which of course 20% of Israel is Arab, approximately. So what do you make of that? What's the legal argument? Is there any basis to support that?
None whatsoever. If that argument were taken seriously, there could be no United States. There could be no Canada, there could be no Australia, there could be no New Zealand, Israel least of all. When Israel was established in 1948, the first thing Ben Gurion did was to announce to the Arabs, please stay. Particularly, he made a special point of the Arabs of Haifa, and many of them did stay in Haifa. Haifa is today, of course, very much a mixed city. You go to a hospital in Haifa, and you will largely be treated by Christian Arabs, who were some of the best doctors in all of Israel. The only removal of Arabs came as a result of a war started by the Arabs. Every war started by a country results in loss of territory. The Germans lost territory in the Second World War. Obviously, the Turks lost territory in the First World War. That's history. It's less of an issue with Israel because, as you say, Israel has a very large Arab population, both Muslim Arab and Christian Arab. Arabs have equal rights under the law. Obviously, there are some exceptions, the law of return, military service, a few other things that hopefully with peace would be remedied. But you can't say that Israel ever ethnically cleansed anybody. Israel defended itself against an aggressive war started by Arab countries, a genocidal war, a war that was designed to destroy the Arabs of Israel. And today it's picked up by the chant, Palestine will be free from the river to the sea. Free of what? Free of Jews. That's the claim. So if there's ever a group that wants ethnic cleansing, obviously it's the river to the sea group that would like to cleanse Israel of its Jewish populations. So it's a nonsense argument that deserves an answer, but doesn't deserve to be taken seriously.
I wish I could get into that more. I'm restricted in time. So let me turn to, and I think it's an important answer that that really there is no argument for it. When your feet on the ground in Israel and see, I went to a doctor. He was an Arab. Most pharmacists are. And God, justices of the Supreme Court, police officers, and on and on and on. So it is a bizarre argument, but it's one that has caught fire in the West among university students and others. And I'm going to come to that in a bit. But first, I want to ask you about the legal status of Judea and Samaria and what we can say about that. And it bears that concept of, as we know, there was the partition plan. It was rejected. Jordan took it over. That's where it got the name West Bank, and I believe only one country recognized Jordanian sovereignty. They've given that up, of course, since, and of course Israel took it back and liberated it in the war in 1967. So the question is, what's the legal status of Judea and Samaria? What's the claim when you lose a territory in war, but it wasn't a Palestinian state? Jordan had taken it over. What does that mean?
Let me start by saying why that question, though it's an interesting question, a good question, is less relevant than the following fact. Israel offered to give back 96% of the West Bank under the Clinton parameters, plus 4% of the Afula Triangle in Israel. In other words, 100%. The Palestinians rejected it. I know. I spoke to Bill Clinton about it repeatedly. He said it was the biggest disappointment of his presidency, that Arafat originally seemed to agree to it. And then when he thought he'd be murdered, no guts, no balls, no courage, Arafat, he backed away from it. And Arafat called Clinton on his last day in office, January 20th, 2001, and said, you're a great president. And Clinton hung the phone up on him and said, I could have been a great president if only you had accepted the accords that was offered with the full support of the Israeli people. And then in 2007, Ehud Olmert sweetened the deal and gave them even more capital in Jerusalem, some symbolic right of return, I think 101% of what they would have gotten in the West Bank. So putting aside the legality of the West Bank, the issue could have been resolved if only the Palestinian leadership didn't know how to take yes for an answer. Everything they ever wanted was offered to them, and they couldn't do it. Why? For a very simple reason. The Palestinian leadership and most of the Palestinian people are not interested in having a Palestinian state next to a Jewish state. Their goal is the abolition of the nation state of Israel. And they will accept no deal that allows Israel to remain the democratic nation state of the Jewish people. That was proved in 2000, that was proved in 2007, and it continues to be proved. So the question about the legal status of the West Bank is far less relevant than the political status of the West Bank. Look, legally, the West Bank, no lawyer can give you a good answer to that question. It's disputed land. It never had sovereignty. It never was a state. It was captured only after Israel sent emissaries to Jordan saying, please don't fire on Jerusalem. If you don't, we will not take 1 inch. We will not take the Kotel, the holiest place in Judaism. We will leave East Jerusalem. We won't do a thing. Just don't attack us. And of course, the Jordanians under the great King Hussein, who I met and spent time with, and everybody thinks is the world's greatest leader, of the Arab people. King Hussein attacked, not only attacked, but attacked civilian targets, sent rockets into West Jerusalem, targeting civilians. And it was only then that Israel responded, and it has a complete right to do, and won the war. And by winning the war, they occupied the West Bank. Which other country that has won a war in occupied territory has then been willing to give it up simply for a paper recognition? So Israel's current status is perfectly legal, completely legal. I'm appalled by what some of the settlers, only individual settlers, have done to individual Palestinians in terms of violence, and the Israeli government must respond forcibly as a criminal matter by prosecuting and convicting, if they're guilty, and sentencing them to prison, any Israeli who attacks an innocent Palestinian or burns an innocent Palestinian's building. But in terms of the legal status, Israel is in the West Bank today completely lawfully.
I think it was President Carter, his administration, that first said, and I might be wrong about that, that it is an illegal occupation. And I think President Trump's administration changed that in terms of a legal finding for whatever that's worth. Well,
it may be, let me interrupt. It may be you're right about Carter. I'm not sure. I can tell you the first time it was ever done in a very overt way was by the worst foreign policy president in American history, Barack Obama, who, after he became a lame duck, issued a statement calling the occupation not only of the West Bank, but of the Kotel, the Western Wall, to be illegally occupied territory. And that's when I broke with my friend, who I had been socially friendly with, Barack Obama. I've never spoken to him again. Once he declared the Western Wall to be illegally occupied territory, that was immediately rescinded, obviously, by President Trump. And I was honored to be at the opening of the Israeli embassy in Jerusalem,
American.
The American embassy in Jerusalem, along with our ambassador and many other, and Benjamin Netanyahu, who signed a brick from the new building to me. I have it in a place of honor in my house. But no, the idea that it's illegally occupied territory is ignorant, ahistorical, and bigoted.
Let me turn to, so does that mean, before I turn away from that, does that mean that Israel has a full and a legally legitimate claim, or is there some argument to say a Palestinian entity can reject, depending how you count, 7 to 10 offers and yet still be able to come back after violence, after intifadas, after all those wars that they started? Are they legally able to come back and say, we've changed our mind? Oops, now we want it.
Bill Clinton said that. There's a wonderful quote that I have in several of my books in which Clinton said, when you reject an offer like that, don't expect it to be on the table. Don't expect to be able to come back after you've killed thousands and thousands of people. By the way, when Arafat accepted Clinton's offer, or rejected Clinton's offer, he not only rejected the offer, he started the intifada and killed 4,000 people were killed, including 1,000 Israelis or perhaps more. So no, you can't just come back and say, whoops, it's a do-over. We're going to accept it. The important point is Israel said it's okay to have a do-over because they made the offer again in 2007 through Ehud Olmert. And nonetheless, the Palestinians didn't accept that offer as well. And so the status quo is perfectly lawful. Could it change? Yeah, it could change if both parties wanted to change. But you've seen the polls. The polls show now that if there were an election in the West Bank, Hamas would win. And Hamas would win on the platform of never making peace with Israel, never accepting a two-state solution. So don't put the onus on Israel. Israel is now very divided. And maybe there isn't a majority for a two-state solution, but that's entirely the fault of the Palestinian leadership. There was a majority, and they screwed it. They screwed it up. They messed it up. They turned public opinion away from a two-state solution. But I suspect there still is room for it if there were a real, genuine peace initiative that perhaps could include extension of the Abraham Accords. I was again honored to play a very small role in the Abraham Accords. I worked with the White House, and I went over to Qatar, met with the Emir of Qatar twice, remember, Qatar in the end did not oppose the Abraham Accords, which was a very important potential barrier to its acceptance. So I still think there is a possibility, but it's diminishing, and it's 100% the fault of the Palestinian leadership, supported by the Palestinian people. And in a democracy, you can't expect to simply turn down all these offers and then expect the voters in a democracy like Israel to say, all right, we'll give you another chance and another chance and another chance. As I've even said, Palestinian leadership does not know how to accept yes for an answer. And he wasn't exactly right about that. It's not that they don't know how to accept yes for an answer. It's that that's not what they want. They don't want a two-state solution. The vast majority of Palestinians and their leadership want a one-state solution with the one state being the final solution for Israel.
When you look at the draft constitution that the Palestinians just came up with, the Palestinian leadership, I should say, just came up with, it exactly supports the sad and unfortunate argument that you just put forward, that there is no desire for a two-state solution. It's a draft constitution that's essentially says no to coexistence. Do you see it a different way?
Mm-mm. No, and no Palestinian constitution would pass, and no leader who proposed it would survive if it explicitly recognized the right of Israel to be the nation state of the Jewish people. Look, I had dinner with Abbas the night before he met Trump the first time during the first administration. We had a long dinner. It's just a small number of us at the home of Ron Lauder in Washington, D.C. And I put to him the issue. I said, look, I'm going to be talking to President Trump. I'm going to be talking to Prime Minister Netanyahu. Can I say that you are open to the possibility of Israel being the nation, democratic nation state of the Jewish people? He said, absolutely not. We would never accept that. I said, well, what about a different formulation? What about saying that Israel is the recognized nation state of the Jewish people? Not a Jewish state, but the nation state of the Jewish people. He looked at me and he said, well, that formulation is interesting, and maybe someday in the future. And as he's saying it, Erekat, his assistant, who's now died since, who was sitting next to him, gave him a zetz, gave him a hit in the belly. You could see, and Abbas said, "Well, we're really not ready to talk about that." So, in my personal conversations with Abbas, he is unwilling to accept the concept of a two-state solution.
It's fascinating. I need to turn, because of time, to another topic, which is the argument of genocide and war crimes, the implication not only for Israeli leadership, but also Israeli soldiers, and also soldiers, lone soldiers, whether from Canada, the United States, Great Britain, Argentina, or wherever, who are serving. Can you talk about whether the claim of genocide, you obviously know where I'm coming from, but can you talk about whether the claim of genocide and war crimes really has any legal basis at all, A, and B, what do we do with that in the face of ICC and certainly governments across Europe dealing with soldiers?
Yeah, the second question is an interesting one. The first question is not an interesting one at all. The claim that Israel is engaged in genocide is no different than the claim that the Jewish rabbis bled Christian children for the blood and put them in matzah. It's just a blood libel. There is no plausible argument that Israel is engaged in genocide, none. And even the, quote, genocide scholars who claim that Israel is engaged in genocide are just a bunch of ignorant bigots. There's no claim at all. We know what genocide is. Genocide is taking the babies from the Isle of Rhodes, not so many miles away from Israel, but miles and miles away from Auschwitz, taking 25,000 people from Rhodes, including babies and women and children, bringing them to Auschwitz in order to put them in gas chambers and kill them, in order to destroy the genes, the genetic component of the Jewish people. We know what genocide is. Genocide is gas chambers in which babies are put in line and then burnt. We know what genocide is. We know what genocide is when the Kurdish people of Syria are subject to complete destruction, which is the goal, of course, of many Muslims. We know genocide. We've seen it throughout the world. What Israel has done is no different from what every other Western democracy has done facing enemies that hide their soldiers among civilians. The only difference is Israel has done better. It has killed fewer civilians. The ratio, even by Hamas figures, of civilians to combatants, according to Hamas, is no worse than 3-1. The typical ratio in wars of this kind is 10-1. So Israel has done far better. But the figures aren't really 3-1. They're more like 1-1. Because who does Hamas count? Hamas accounts as a child, an 18-year-old terrorist with guns and weapons. But because they're 18, they're children. They count as women, not as terrorists. A woman who fires guns at Israelis. If you consider all the children, remember Hamas recruits from 14 up. So you have 14-year-olds, 15, 16, 17, 18-year-olds who are terrorists. If you count all the women, if you count all the people who have allowed rockets to be hidden in their homes, all the people who have allowed themselves to be used as human shields, the ratio of actual combatants to civilians is probably closer to 1-1, a ratio never, ever previously achieved in any war. So when the best is called the worst, you have to look at who's making the call. So the claim that Israel committed genocide is not believed except by 18, 19-year-old ignorant college students at places like Harvard, where I taught, where the ignorance is so profound among college students that you wouldn't believe that they ever got admitted to Harvard or Yale or Princeton. But no serious person believes the charge of genocide. And anyone who makes it is a bigot and an ignoramus and shouldn't be taken seriously. Having said that, there's a real problem because there are folks in Canada, there are folks in France, there are folks in other countries that claim that Israel committed genocide. And in some of these countries, they're prepared to arrest Israeli soldiers, good and decent soldiers who would never, ever kill a civilian deliberately or purposely and subject them to arrest. And so the United States has an important role to play. They have to impose sanctions on any government, any individual who uses the term genocide against Israel. And I think that Donald Trump can be persuaded to do that. He's already imposed sanctions on the Palestinian rapporteur at the United Nations, who is a bigot, obviously, and individuals, and that has to be done more. There is no plausible claim, none, to the allegation that Israel committed genocide. If you list all the countries in the world that have engaged in wars, Israel would be at the very, very lowest level of any allegations of the deliberate killing of civilians for purposes of genetically wiping out an entire people. It's just a false claim. Again, it's analogous to the claim that Jewish rabbis bled Christian children for their blood. I have in my office a 1494 poster, just right after the printing press is invented, a poster printed showing a Jewish rabbi bleeding a Christian child with the blood pouring into a vat to make matzah. And that's where the genocide claim should be put. I'll probably try to get a genocide claim. I'll put it alongside the blood libel claim in my office to remind me and others who come into my office of how absurd that claim is. So it should be treated as the bigotry that it is, and it should be defended. And those soldiers who bravely put their lives at risk to protect civilians should be defended.
So can I jump back then to the International Court at The Hague, who made an interim ruling saying that there was not a plausible case of genocide. That's not what they found, but that the Palestinians had a plausible right to advance a case, essentially. Can you comment on what they actually held and the implications of that decision?
Well, the International Court of Justice has nothing to do with international or being a court or justice. It's a fake court. It's a court that consists of people picked by their countries to do their country's bidding. So the International Court of Justice is not a court. The International Criminal Court could be a real court, and it was a real court when Luis Ocampo, the first prosecutor, was the head of it. But once he's left, now it has crooks and rapists like Khan, the head of it. I know Khan. I worked with him on a case, and he is an intellectual thug and shouldn't be. He's been suspended. But there's no basis for any claim. South Africa, which is itself a failed government, a failed country, has made these claims, and now it's gotten some other countries to go along with it. But again, remember, Southern courts in the United States, when I started practicing law, when I went to law school in the 1950s, Southern courts were ordering essentially the lynching of innocent Black people. Just because they're courts and they wear black robes doesn't give them legitimacy. No one should take seriously anything said by the International Court of Justice. It's not a court. It's not international. Israelis and others don't serve on it, and it wouldn't recognize justice if it fell over it. The International Criminal Court, which the United States is not a member of, thankfully, which Israel is not a member of, has no jurisdiction over Israel. I worked with Khan and his assistant before they made the genocide and war crimes claims, and I had arranged for them to come to Israel and meet with the prime minister, to go to Gaza, to look for themselves. I made that arrangement myself. And then I got a phone call saying the chief prosecutor has canceled his trip to Israel. And the guy who called me told me why. He was his immediate assistant. He said the reason is basically because he was charged with rape and he wants to divert attention from the rape. And he was told that if you attack Israel and accuse it of genocide and war crimes, the UN will go easy on you on the rape charge. And that's the story. So right now, Israel should not intellectually or morally take seriously any claims from the International Criminal Court or the International Court of Justice, but it has to pragmatically fight back. And it has to make sure that every soldier that's arrested is vigorously defended. Years ago, I offered to defend the head of the Israeli Air Force, and he accepted it. I was formerly his lawyer because he was being subjected to being arrested in England. And I said, if he gets arrested, I'll fly over and defend him. He didn't get arrested, but there were threats of every country in Western Europe going after very decent Israeli leaders and individual soldiers, including lone soldiers. So we have to stand behind them in every way. And we have to make sure the United States vigorously attacks anybody who goes after Israel on these absurd grounds.
Well, thank you for that answer. I was trying to emphasize that there's been no finding of genocide, notwithstanding, or even though there's that. Yeah, agreed.
It's what if there were a finding by a court saying that Jewish rabbis bled Christian children? Would we take seriously that finding? We'd fight back And there were trials, the Bayless trial and other trials like that, but history has regarded those trials as undeserving of being called trials or being called law. And that's the way we must respond to the false charges and the racist and bigoted charges of genocide against Israel.
Yeah, the problem is the situation in the present when you're subject to them. I think we're just about out of time, as I think Don's about to tell me that.
Because of the late start, 7 more minutes.
Okay.
7 more
So,
minutes.
okay, so I have a couple more questions for you. I actually have many more.
You ask me the questions, I want to take a minute so I have an opportunity. I want to particularly thank the Christian members of the audience who have been so supportive of Israel, that truth, Israel, honesty, morality today requires the support of Christians more than they've ever required that before. And I want to personally thank Mike Huckabee, my friend, who's the not only the ambassador to Israel, but a great Christian pastor, Minister Hagee, so many of the others who have understood their Christianity better than some others have, and why, as a Christian, you must be supportive of the morality of Israel. So a heartfelt thanks to the Christian members of the audience and to Christians who are listening to this. You need to know how much we appreciate it.
And the Bridges for Peace people are an amazing example of that. What a great segue into what I was going to ask, which is this. What can we really learn to deal with the libels that are happening from universities? You touched on that earlier, against the Jewish people. What can Canada learn? What can people do really to deal with that, whether as Christians and as Jews and as Hindus, as whatever? What can we do to deal with that?
First of all, make sure that universities invite multiple voices to be heard. Since October 8th, I have not been invited by a Canadian university to speak about Israel. I haven't been invited by Harvard University, where I was probably the most prominent, well-known professor on Harvard's faculty for many years. But since Gaza, I have never been invited to return back and speak to the Harvard Law School, to the Harvard Divinity School, the medical school, any of those schools, nor have I been invited back to speak where I spoke many times at Concordia, at other universities, great universities in Canada. So we have to have multiple voices, and I'm happy to be one of those voices. But we also need young people, we need women, we need people of different backgrounds. There are Muslim intellectuals who are supportive of Israel, people of every background. So we have to make sure that diversity means more than just skin deep diversity, that it means intellectual and viewpoint diversity, and that all points of view are presented. I'll give you a statement. You will find this hard to believe. The Harvard Law School faculty has about 100 people. I was on it for 50 years. I'm now emeritus. 100 faculty, probably half of them are Jewish. Not a single professor at Harvard Law School is prepared to speak out publicly on behalf of Israel today. They are testicularly challenged. They have no balls. They are afraid that they will be criticized by their students, by the radical faculty. And what's going on in universities today is educational malpractice, not only about Israel, but about every moral issue of the day. Today, universities have become places where narratives are presented that are ideologically skewed on one side. I'm a liberal. When I went to the Harvard faculty, I was the most liberal member of the faculty. Erwin Kahler was one of the most liberal members of McGill faculty. Today, we're not invited to speak on these issues because one side is presented, and only one side. The anti-Israel faculty members speak out loudly and proudly, and the few pro-Israel faculty members call me on the phone and whisper and say, thank you for speaking up. Why don't you have the courage? Well, no, I can't speak up, but thank you for speaking up. That's what's going on today in American universities. It's going on in the media. It's going on within political parties, including in Canada and in England and in France and all over the world. And we have to fight back. And the Jewish community is too divided. Organizations like J Street are destructive of Israel. Newspapers like the Jewish Daily Forward are destructive of Israel. And we need to unite behind Israel at this point. The other point I want to make is Rabbi Hillel said at the time of Jesus over 2,000 years ago, Im ein ani li mili, if I am not for myself, who will be for me? And if I am for myself alone, what am I? I have devoted most of my life to the second part of that. I have defended the rights of African Americans, the rights of gays, the rights of transgender people, the rights of discriminated against people of every kind. Now the time has come for me and for many others like me to prioritize our financial giving, our emotional giving, our intellectual giving to the defense of Israel and the Jewish people. We are today's underdogs. We are the ones who need the defense. We're the people you have to march with, not our enemies. And so I pledge myself to devoting the rest of my life, however long the good Lord gives me, to the defense of the morality of Israel, the morality of the Jewish people. I welcome others to join me in that, but I think priorities have to shift, and my priorities have now shifted in favor of the favor of Im ein ani li mili and in lo achshav matai, if not now, when.
Fantastic answer, Alan. I'm not taken aback because I've read you and and I know you a little bit, and I can only thank you for what you're saying. I'm going to shift gears entirely in the last couple of minutes and just ask you this. I did ask you off the air before, how at your stage of the game, at your vintage, a fine vintage for wine, a fine vintage for you, how do you look so young and how do you remain so vigorous? That's number one. Number two is what gives you hope, and if you were born in any age, when would you want to be born?
Well, thank you. Being 87, that's not even good for most vintages. Most Bordeaux's already begin to turn before.
Depends how they're kept. It depends how they're kept.
I'm thankful to the good Lord and to my family. My mother lived to 95. My father had Alzheimer's. He did not. But I try to live a healthy life. I try to walk 4 miles a day. I drink my water and lemon. And I have a wonderful family, and that's very supportive of me, despite the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune that I have. But what really keeps me going are my enemies. I won't give in to them. I suspect that I'd never wanted to retire, but I suspect if suddenly peace broke out, if suddenly there was regime change in Iran, which I'm hoping will happen, if suddenly the Palestinians make peace with Israel, probably my usefulness will dissipate. But I have a hunch that's not going to happen. And so as long as I have enemies, I will, and as long as the Jewish people have enemies, I will continue to fight. I was once asked on a show, if I could have been born at any age, what would it have been? And I said, I would have wished I could have been born 20 or 30 years earlier. I was born in 1938. If I had been born in 1918, maybe I could have fought against Nazism. Maybe I could have done something. Elie Wiesel gave me the greatest compliment in the world. Overstated, way overstated. But when I got when I made a speech and he introduced me, he said if there had been more Jews like Alan Dershowitz in the 1930s and 40s, maybe the history of European Jewry would have been different. I don't think so. I don't think anything could have stopped that bigotry. But I would have liked to be part of that fight. And I envy those who were able to fight that fight against Nazism, against fascism, against bigotry. I worry that we may see it again. You asked me, do I have hope? In Israel, they say a pessimist is somebody who says, oy vey, gewalt, things are so bad they can't get worse. And an optimist says, yes, they can. Things can get worse. I think they are going to get worse because if you want to make a prediction, and the Talmud says, prophecy ended with the destruction of the Second Temple. But if you want to make a prediction of how things will be in America and in Canada in 20 years, you look at the college students today, and based on that, things are going to get worse. Because when these college students today, these 18, 19, 20-year-olds, become 35 and 40-year-olds and run for parliament and Congress and become editors of New York Times and other newspapers, things are going to get worse. So we have to direct our attention to the young people today. Thankfully, there are organizations like Stand With Us and Chabad and others that are pulling Jews together on campus and uniting them against the common enemy. But we have a hard job. This is probably the most dangerous time for the Jewish community since the 1940s. And I never thought I would live to see a time when the kind of bigotry that I experienced as a young man, very young man, continues today. It's taken a different form. It's morphed. But anti-Semitism has always morphed over the centuries. It has always tried to figure out what the common bond of people today is and try to persuade them of anti-Semitic tropes. So we have to be relevant. We have to be up to date. We have to use all our technology. The one message I would send to everybody is do not ever be ashamed of your strength. Use your strength, Oz. Use your strength. Use your military strength, Israel. Use your political strength, Jews of the United States and Canada. Use your economic strength if you are a wealthy person who earned your money by your hard work. Use your educational strength. Use your moral strength. Never, ever be ashamed of how strong you are. Yes, the Jews have done better successfully than other comparable groups of our size, but we haven't used it to our benefit. And today we have to use our accumulated strength for the benefit of the Jewish people. So I would just end by saying, Chazak ve'ematz, be strong and be truthful. And am I optimistic? I'm mixed. But I do believe we can control our own destiny, which wasn't true in the 1930s. And we have to do a better job of controlling it. So thank you for the opportunity to express my views. And I hope that at least some of you will follow and implement some of the things I've said and work hard in defense of justice, truth, tzedek, and then the Jewish people.
So, Alan, first of all, ad mea v'esrim, they're applauding for you as well. They should. Until 120 for you. We're so blessed, really, to have you here. And I don't only mean here remotely in Winnipeg, where I'm not and you're not, but I mean here, making the arguments, advancing the case, standing up for what's right. We're fortunate in Canada. We do have a political group that a political leader and party that actually stands for the right stuff, but it's a very tough world. We're so grateful that you came here. We're grateful to hear you. We're grateful for what you write. You're a hero. I speak personally there as a lawyer and and I would say above and beyond everything else, a real mensch. And for those who don't understand the role of a criminal justice attorney, they need to begin to understand. They need to read a little bit, do some introspection. But for the rest of us, just thank you, thank you, thank you. And I'm sure we'll speak again. Thank you very much. I applaud you. I hope the people out there in Winnipeg are applauding as well.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the opportunity.